Good afternoon and welcome to KI. My name is Rabbi Lance Sussman, and with me is Cantor Levy and Andrew Sen on our keyboard. We're all here to honor the memory of our emeritus Rabbi, Rabbi Simeon J. Maslin, Zichrono Livracha. May his memory be a blessing. Just a few days ago, Rabbi Maslin, or as we call him Shim, his family found a set of instructions as to exactly how this service should be conducted. And for those of you who knew Shim's writings, one of his important books, Gates of Mitzvah, had exact detailed instructions as to how we are to practice Reform Judaism, complete with footnotes in the Talmudic literature. So in that spirit, this service is going to follow Rabbi Maslin's outline as best as we possibly can in order to honor his final wishes for the congregation. I am not a high-tech rabbi, but Cantor and Ross are very high-tech, and occasionally you'll see them making adjustments for me. Shim asked us to begin with a piece of music for our regulars you'll recognize from the high holidays from one of his favorite music composers, Janowski, Sim Shalom, Let There Be Peace. The second instruction that Shim left is a request to make sure that we recognize the presence of any of his rabbinic colleagues who may be attending today. I know that there are many watching online, so it's hard for me to tell behind the mask who's a rabbi and who's a rabbi wannabe. So if you are a rabbi and have proof of ordination and vaccination, I would ask you to raise your hand so we can greet you. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi and Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi Sherman, for being here. We welcome you, our colleagues, to this memorial service for Shim. And second, because of the very special relationship between a rabbi and the president or parnas of the congregation, if any of our former presidents, current president I see are here, if you would just simply raise your hand. This is part of what we call the three-legged stool, this partnership between administrator, rabbi, and president. It's a unique and special set of relationships that make synagogues work and benefit our community. Thank you all for being here and for honoring Shim. I won't say each time Shim made a request, but for this one I'll say he did want a psalm read at the front end of the service. This is Psalm 15, which is an ancient reflection on the ethical life. Shim lived the ethical life and in many ways was an ethicist himself. Adonai mi yagur bo halecha mi yishkom bohar kadshecha halech tamim u'foel tzedek v'dover emet bilvavo. Adonai, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain, those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others or wrong them or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless but honor those who revere God, who give their word and come what may, do not retract, who do not exploit others. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken for their days on earth. Please join me in the words of the 23rd Psalm. I believe they're available in the trifolds as well. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. From the book of Ecclesiastes, attributed to King Solomon, who ruled in Jerusalem 3,000 years ago. L'chol zaman ve'et, l'chol chafetz tachat hashamayim, et laledet ve'et lamut. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Today is a time to remember. Let us take a moment now, each in our own way silently, remembering our beloved Shim Maslin. we remember. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember him. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we will remember him. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember him. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we will remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember him. When we are lost and sick at heart, we will remember him. When we have joys we yearn to share, we will remember him. So long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. Family and friends of Rabbi Shim Maslin, the Torah portion for this week is Truma from the book of Exodus. It begins by discussing the first Jewish fundraiser to raise the capital to build the portable sanctuary in the desert. Asuli Mikdash, build me a sanctuary, God commands Moses, V'shachanti b'tochem, so I may dwell among you, the people of Israel. Rabbi Shim Maslin devoted his entire life to building, sustaining, and growing the sanctuary of Israel, the synagogue, with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his might. I met Shim over 30 years ago when I attended a rabbinic conference here in Philadelphia. The keystone event of that gathering was a visit here to KI. There were hundreds of rabbis in this room. I sat in the back row of this synagogue, on that side over there, with my classmates, captivated by the oratory of the president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. I was just one in a big crowd. Little did I know, or Shim know, that our paths would cross again and again and again in this sanctuary. 22 years ago, following my appointment here as Shim's successor, Liz and I met Shim and Judy in a more personal way at a beautiful Shabbat dinner in their Elkins Park apartment, surrounded by their loved ones. For 22 years, I have enjoyed the friendship and support of Rabbi Maslin and his entire family, with whom I now enjoy a multi-generational relationship and for which I am deeply grateful. At their request, and out of love and concern for my own health, I am not going to speak at length, and it's taking a lot to hold back, I can tell you that. But Judy said she orders it. But there is something, quote, rabbinic that I feel I must say about Shim. Shim deeply believed in the concept of kavod harav, respecting the rabbi, and always made sure that I, as the new senior rabbi of this congregation, was shown respect and deference by him and by others. Shim believed that all of us, especially rabbis, were commanded to build the sanctuaries of the Jewish people. He was a rabbi's rabbi, a brilliant orator, a gifted writer, and a true scholar of Judaism. He served a multitude of pulpits from Curacao to Chicago to Elkins Park and elsewhere. He believed deeply in the historical necessity and religious authenticity of Reform Judaism here and especially in Israel. To help us better appreciate his long life of 90 years as this congregation's spiritual leader and as a person who belonged to a special family, we have the privilege of listening now to two full eulogies. First by Karen Sirota, a former KI president, and secondly by Galia Godel, a granddaughter, representing her family and especially her generation. Shim was a man equally at home on the pulpit, studying the sacred texts of our tradition, piloting his own boat off the coast of Maine, and joyfully celebrating Shabbat with his own family. It was a true privilege to have known him and to have shared with him the sacred work of building the Mikdash, the sanctuary of the Jewish people. Zichrono livracha, his memory is now a blessing for all of us. Amen. It's now my great honor to invite Karen Sirota to this bima, and she'll be followed by Galia.
Good afternoon, everyone. I never got to speak to Shim this past week. He was just too ill to talk on the phone, but I wanted to speak to him just one last time. I wanted to tell him, as I told him before, how central he was to my connection to Reform Judaism, both personally and professionally, and to this congregation that has cradled my family for nearly 4 decades, and it all began with Shim. I wanted to tell him how proud I was to be his friend, not just because of his many accomplishments, but to know that as friends we cared about each other and we cared about each other's families. I wanted to tell him that maybe next summer, if we were really lucky, we would again travel up to Maine, to his and Judy's beloved Maine home, in the embrace of his family, and to share Shabbat with them, to laugh and to sing and to engage in spirited discussions as we overlooked that beautiful lake that was his home at Harpswell by the sea. But telling him all that was not meant to be. And because he was in much discomfort and too tired to speak, I particularly want to thank Judy and Naomi and Eve and David, who invited me to speak here this evening about my rabbi and about my friend Simeon Maslin. It is an honor that will forever be in my heart, and my reflections for today are what I would have told him. It was Wednesday, September 26, 1984, when I first met Shim, although it was from afar, very far. I know that day because it was a defining one for me. I know it because it was Erev Rosh Hashanah, and it was our first one here at KI. But it was more than that. So when I realized how ill Shim was, I hurried over to KI, furiously searching through the meticulous KI archives, looking for, finding, and reading that Rosh Hashanah sermon that Shim delivered nearly 40 years ago, which began my ever-connectedness to this congregation and to Shim as my rabbi, and later my good fortune as my friend. That Rosh Hashanah Eve, I was transformed by his presence and most importantly, by his words. Not a man large in stature, but strong and powerful and eloquent in his convictions and his message. My husband Rob and I had grown up in the Reform movement, and we had just moved to Philadelphia, so we were synagogue shopping. We wanted to find a place to raise our sons. We walked into this large, imposing sanctuary where many of us are gathered today. Amid the glow of these magnificent stained glass windows, a perfect time of the day to see them. We tried not to be taken in by just the physical appearance of the place. We took a seat way in the back, and I mean way in the back near the kitchen. That's how crowded it was then. The service was familiar to us. And then Rabbi Maslin strode to the bima to give the first of his 3 High Holy Day sermons, connected by the theme, to live as a Jew. And the first one was the miracle of birth. It was a special year for him. It was the 30th wedding anniversary that year to his beloved Judy, August 22nd. And I know that date because Rob and I, 51 years ago, were married on August 22nd. It was also the 30th anniversary of his decision to enter the rabbinate. And on that Rosh Hashanah day, the birthday of the world, it was his utter joy that he became a grandfather for the first time. It was the arrival of Jonathan Pele Maslin. Premature at birth, Jonathan hovered at the edge of survival, but fought his way back to health, gaining weight and strength. So the theme of the sermon was about miracles and about Pele, which in Hebrew is miracles, and there was the obvious connection. It was about the birth of a child and the devotion to raising our children to make us partners in the miracle of birth and ultimately the miracle of Jewish survival. He encouraged us to observe the countless miracles that surrounded us that we often forgot to see. Shim's message, his poignant story, was universal, but it was also personal. The latter of which, I would find out, was not generally his style. But for me, it was a glimpse into his heart, particularly as he mentioned those small little notebooks that he tucked away in a safe deposit box, where he recorded the birth of his children, all wrapped in miracles and all in a measure of his love for them. And to me, it was a measure of who he was. So I slowly began to get to know Shim through my ever-expanding involvement as KI leadership. His sermons continued to inspire me every time he spoke. He was a rabbi devoted to truth. He became an emerging public voice on issues of importance. He worked to bring the authentic and complex voice of our traditions to bear on unsolvable problems of our time. He was an unwavering supporter of the increasing role of women in the reform movement and beyond. He was single-mindedly dedicated to interfaith work, saying that, and I quote, "We join the ranks of those Jews and Christians who are dedicated to fashioning a better world, rooted in our diverse traditions, but open to the possibility to love thy neighbor as thyself." And he continued, and I quote, "He wished for a world where brothers and sisters wipe away each other's tears and greet each other with shalom." His KI work reinforced all those areas he held in esteem, and KI and this congregation was the beneficiary of it all. The Maslin years saw a growth in our congregation as he stood on the shoulders of those rabbinic giants who preceded him. He strengthened our synagogue home as a center of unparalleled learning and community and of caring. We are in many ways the center of Jewish life in Philadelphia. And he passed that mantle lovingly to our current rabbi, Lance Sussman, whose talents has allowed him to build on that inspiring legacy as well. But at his essence, Shim was a teacher, and he never missed an opportunity to do just that. Whether it was on the bima, at a university lecture, a small group congregation gathering, a group of KI confirmands, an overcapacity symposium of colleagues, he was in his element, offering words of Torah intertwined with his wise reflections that added meaning and relevance to those ancient stories. As luck would have it, post-retirement, Shim accepted an offer to lead High Holy Day services at Bowdoin College, the prestigious university near his home in Maine. That single service led to more than 20 years of his connection to Bowdoin, where he expanded his reach, preaching to students and faculty on the High Holy Days and then in the Shabbat morning Chavarah that he led and that he so loved. In an invocation at graduation, he spoke and recounted the school's motto from the book of Proverbs, Et Aquila versus Koalim, an eagle toward the sky, encouraging the graduates to soar like eagles in creativity and social service, in healing, in unmodified truth, and the pursuit of justice for all. And then he added the words of the prophet Isaiah, They who learn for God will renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary and never be tired. So many of you here in person and virtually know of Shim's rabbinic accolades, as Rabbi Maslin mentioned, and the values he held dear. But in the years that followed that first sermon that I listened to, I was fortunate to see the Shim beyond his academic and professional achievements, although they were always part of his backdrop. He was an integral part of the many celebrations that Rob and I had with our family. He was there in the more challenging moments as well. My relationship with Shim and his family was indeed personal. And I was privy to the connections that were an outgrowth of his appreciation for those miracles and his family. He was a tremendously engaging storyteller. I'm sure most of you know that. He would weave tales to young and old alike, and you could just tell with that little small smile how much he relished it. He was also humorous. He always had a spot-on, relevant joke to entertain for those of us lucky to sit around his dining room table in his more casual moments with his family or a group of friends. He always seemed also to love to sing. When I was KI president and Shim was already retired, I rarely employed the president prerogative. We used to hand out assignments for officers to sit on the bima. But when Shim led the service, I used my presidential prerogative and I assigned myself to be there that evening. And why? It's not that I didn't want to sit next to him, and I wanted not to hear him, because I could hear him in any seat, but I wanted to sit next to him to hear him sing. He was not a cantor by trade or by talent, although it was his father's profession, and thus it was in his DNA. But his singing came from the depths of his heart, full-throated, joyful, plaintive when appropriate, and hearing it, and I can still hear it now, it lifted up the Shabbat experience for me. He was also a lover of boats, or at least the boat that he captained, usually with an offspring or a grandchild in Maine. Sometimes he would go out for a solo cruise, which made the KR leadership pretty anxious because he wouldn't take a cell phone with him, and nor did he probably have one. It was our repeated request for him to take that, but he wouldn't, but eventually he did renege. And then there were the cruise ships, where he and Judy happily sojourned the world, enjoying the salt air, the scenery, each other, and the opportunities to celebrate Jewish festivals and holidays on the high sea. I would be remiss not to mention Judy, although I'm sure Galia will. One only had to see Judy and Shim and their caring devotion to each other. They took care of each other. They were the standard bearers of the second in the 3 sermons he gave during those high holidays long ago. It was entitled The Sanctity of Marriage. To see them together was to understand that sermon and to understand that marriage, like theirs, was indeed a joyful miracle, and like birth, was bound up in Jewish survival. I know Galia will talk further about this, but my remarks wouldn't complete unless I mentioned their obvious, lifelong, deep commitment, love for each other, and the values they instilled in their children. We at KI extend our appreciation to Judy for her devotion to KI. She allowed it to thrive, and we also offer gratitude to their family for sharing them with us so generously. So as we say farewell, we will remember Shim's words, his deeds, and his devotion. We will remember his smile, which remains on the face of my beloved friend Naomi. His daughter, who shares his smile, his wit, and his intelligence, and is my dear friend. We will remember him in the lives of meaning that his children and grandchildren have created in the hearts of those who respected him and loved him. And the third part of that three-part sermon, it was on the celebration of death. And in Shim's own words from the sermon, he offers this comfort, and I quote, "What comes most readily comes to mind at the end of a life is the tears of a spouse and the tears of children and grandchildren on the death of a person who has lived a full life, 80, 90, or even 100 years. The tears are not of fear. Their grief is not of frustration or anger. It is because they loved and were loved in return, that the focus of that love is now gone, but will live on in each of them as they move on in love and memory. So to my dear friend Shim, on the wings of an eagle, your memory and your good works will soar. Zecher Sadiq Livracha, may the memory of Simeon Maslin, the righteous, always abide for a blessing. I will miss you, Shim. Rest in peace.
Thank you, folks in person, folks virtually, so much for joining us today as we honor my grandfather. I'm so grateful to Karen for speaking about his accomplishments and his life as a rabbi and a leader. I and all my siblings and cousins had the remarkable privilege to see that side of him, to watch him lead services and text studies, to read his books, and also to have him as our Saba. It was fascinating to grow up as his grandchild, vaguely aware that he was well known and respected, but far more interested in the secret passage in his KI office, or steering the Mama Go-Go, his boat, when we visited Maine together each summer. He made each of us feel a remarkable combination of incredibly unique and special, and also part of a larger whole, a family. I reached out to the other grandchildren while I was trying to figure out what to say here, looking for anecdotes and emotions to share. I got back both some new and wonderful stories that I was delighted to learn about, and was also reminded of shared memories that I'd forgotten. It was honestly really joyful to write this, to remember Saba in these ways. First on most of our minds was the Mama Go-Go, and later the Mama Go-Go 2. What a boat. Capable of sitting dead in the water for hours at a time as we wished and hoped and prayed to catch a fish, for Safta to clean and cook, of course. And also of zipping around the Maine coastline, taking us from adventure to adventure. Saba made every bit of these trips fun. Even getting gas at the marina was an event, let alone piling the whole family in and heading somewhere for lunch. Traveling to Cook's by boat, who could believe it? A lot of our fondest memories of Saba were up in Maine, because that's where he was the most relaxed. From watching his ferocious Scrabble battles with my mother, to outdoor classical music concerts, he was clearly in his element, and it was lovely to be there with him. One of my favorite ways to spend a Maine morning with Saba was to go with him to Bookland, a bookstore with a small restaurant in the back. Cafe, maybe. It was usually just the two of us. He did not want to wrangle more than one grandchild at a time. And we would have lox or whitefish on bagels, and he would have a coffee while I had a raspberry fizz, and then I would break off to read. It's how I first read The Princess Bride in chunks of a few hours at a time, while he slowly read the newspaper after our lunches together. I felt so special and grown up that he took me with him, and was more than a bit chagrined last week to receive the same anecdote from more than one cousin. Funny to realize, but also a clear picture of how he made each of us feel special. It was important to Saba that we understood the things he loved, and he took great pleasure in explaining them. My cousin Ilana and I spoke by phone last week, and she shared an anecdote where Saba picked her up for lunch one afternoon, just the two of them, and she got into the car to hear his ubiquitous classical music playing. Anyone who spent time with him at home or in the car knew that it was on constantly, Maine or Philadelphia, and he would whistle or dee-da-dee along. Ilana, not a fan of classical music, asked if he would change the station. Saba said no. But then he went on to explain the piece that was playing, Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, and to narrate the story that it told to Ilana. No one had previously explained that classical music had plot and movement, and Ilana went on that summer to listen to more classical music records, wondering what stories those pieces told. He made it exciting, Ilana told me. I didn't like it before, but he gave me a reason to like it. Unsurprisingly, Saba valued education of all sorts, from prestigious academic accomplishments to music lessons. He celebrated our knowledge and gave us opportunities to learn more. Cousin Benny wrote a letter to Saba last week where he reminisced about his college days in Philadelphia, when they would discuss primary Judaic texts over coffee and a bagel, and met at Penn to enjoy a lecture together at Hillel or the Judaic Studies department. Saba was my bat mitzvah tutor, and putting aside his disappointment when I didn't practice as much between lessons as he expected me to, what drove me was the expectation that I would learn and succeed at reading the whole Parsha and the Haftarah and all of the prayers and write the Devar Torah and lead the entire service. He knew that I could do it, and I wish I still had that cassette player and tape and could keep rewinding and playing his voice again and again. Saba also had his, well, I won't call them foibles, but things that made us laugh. A love for the Red Sox so strong that we wrote a damn Yankees parody for him. The expressions that he tried to stifle when anyone who couldn't carry a tune sang along on the holidays. Tamar reminded me of a family reunion at a resort in Maine more than 15 years ago. There was a little ice cream shop near the building where we were staying, and Saba told the manager there to open a tab under the name Maslin. Now, 10 grandchildren, several days, unlimited ice cream. You can imagine how that went. Saba did not imagine it as well, and was shocked at the bill at the end of the week. How could they eat $300 worth of ice cream, he wondered. Oh, Saba. Saba taught us how to love Jewish text and classical music. He would sit us on his lap after Shabbat dinners and conduct the Birkat Hamazon with our little kiddo arms. He officiated the weddings of some of my most beloved family members, and even made going to the dump in Maine a fun trip. Saba told the same stories year after year, and gamely accepted the same corrections year after year. He loved terrible jokes with witty punchlines, and he loved all of us so, so much. I really miss him already. I'm sad that we won't get to chat awkwardly on the phone while he waits for Safta to pick up and take over the conversation, or watch Jeopardy over dinner in the kitchen, shouting out the answers together. But I'm grateful for the presence of each person here at KI or watching over the live stream, knowing and loving him, and moving forward together. Thank you.
Thank you, Galia and Karen. In his instructions, Shim wrote that after the eulogies, he wanted us to listen together to Yivarechecha, the priestly benediction, Birkat Kohanim, from the book of Numbers, written by Janowski. Shim picked this piece for this service, for this moment. As he wrote, he blessed this congregation innumerable times with these exact words from Sefer Bamidbar. And he viewed this very moment that we're in now as his last blessing over all of you in this sacred place. Before we turn to the concluding prayers, just a few announcements. Following services here in the sanctuary, a meal of consolation will be served in the KG auditorium. You can exit the same way that you came in. Please allow for the Maslin family to leave the sanctuary first, and because of COVID, there will be no reception line. After we eat together, if you have enough time, please remain for a Shiva Minyan in Shim's memory back here in our sanctuary. A very slightly modified Shiva schedule is as follows. Tomorrow, Tuesday, we'll have Shiva here at KI beginning at 3:30 to 5:30. There's a funeral at 2 o'clock. Then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at the late residence from 3 to 5. That's at 1420 Locust Apartment 9I. As his last wish, Shim sought to establish a fund here at KI to bring distinguished speakers to our mikdash, to our sanctuary. Please consider making a truma, a gift in Shim's honor and memory. And finally, before we turn to our closing memorial prayers, I want to thank again both of our speakers and all of you who are here personally in attendance and watching online, literally all over the world, for offering your love and support at this difficult moment. We turn now to the concluding prayers. Birth is a beginning. Leidahi Reshit, Uftira Tachlit, Hachayim Kamasahem, Kahalicha Kitzmicha, Mishalav L'Shalav. Birth is a beginning, death a destination, life a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, death a destination, life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage, from birth to death to life everlasting. For those of you who are able to stand, I would ask you to please rise for El Malay Rachamim and to remain standing now afterwards for the mourner's Kaddish.
Shim
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to our beloved Rabbi Simeon J. Maslin, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And together let us say, Amen. Remain standing for the mourner's Kaddish. It's in your trifolds. We join together. Yit gadal v'yit gadash shemei Rabbi. V'almad devrach irutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shemei Rabba mevarach le'olam u'lamei omaya. Yit barak v'yishtabach v'yit pa'ar v'yit ramam v'yit naseh. V'yit hadar v'yit alev v'yit halal shemei d'kudsha barich hu. Le'ela minko birchata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechamata. Damiran bi'alma v'imru Amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya. V'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Osei shalom b'mramav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. May God grant peace to those who mourn and bring comfort to all of the bereaved among us. Amen. Would ask you to remain standing in your places and allow the family to exit the sanctuary first. We are concluded. Thank you for being here.